Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Payback, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
It was a beautiful, clear morning. The air tingled with the freshness of another summer day. And even though it was still early, the sun had already been up for a long time, making everything bright and shiny and hot. The dispatcher gave Hank, Payback, and Emily their jobs for the day. And then he turned to George. "You'll be towing the garbage barge today, George," said the dispatcher. "You'll take him to the Navy Yard this afternoon." Theodore guessed by the grumpy look on George's face that George wasn't too happy about getting the job. "Theodore," the dispatcher continued, "please go over to Rebecca, the research vessel, right away. I need you to tell her that her bell isn't working." "Her bell, sir?" Theodore asked, afraid that he must have missed something while he was thinking about George. "Yes, please tell her that her bell isn't working." "On my way," called Theodore.
Wait. Since when does Rebecca have a bell? And why do you need to send Theodore to tell Rebecca this? She has a radio, no? Wouldn't that be easier? Also, look at how grumpy George is. Hey, I'd be like that too if I had a job I didn't want to do. Why does this sound like something James or Gordon would do? Yeah, anyway, so while Theodore is on his way to Rebecca's dock, he bumps into our Bill and Ben of the series, playing a classical inside joke on each other.
"Hi, Philip," he said to one side. "Hi, Fillmore," he said to the other side. "I'm Fillmore," replied the fairy on the first side. "And I'm Philip," said the fairy on the other side. You see, the fairy twins look exactly the same, and they like to get the tugs mixed up about their name. Whenever Theodore called one of their names, they'd always say it was the other, just for fun. Then they'd all have a good laugh at their little joke. "We bet you can't guess our names," called Fillmore. "Next time," finished Philip with a toot. "There's nothing like a good laugh," Theodore chuckled to himself.
Well, Theodore is right. Everyone's always in the mood for a laugh. By the way, it's also good to see these two little fairies again. But what does this have to do with the episode? Well, let's move on and you'll see. So Theodore continues on until he smells a very foul scent in the air. The big question is, where is it coming from?
The smell seemed to be coming from over where Rebecca was docked. Theodore looked and looked, and then he could see that Rebecca's deck was filled with something dark. It seemed to be steaming in the hot sun. Could that stuff be what's causing this terrible smell, he wondered? Theodore didn't want to get any closer to that smell, so he called out to her in a loud voice. "The dispatcher said to tell you that your smell is broken. Your bell is broken." Well, first, Benjamin Bridge started chuckling. And then Philip and Fillmore hooted with laughter. Theodore turned and wondered why everyone was laughing. Then he realized he had said that her smell was broken, instead of saying that her bell was broken. He'd made a joke. "It's from this seaweed on my deck," called Rebecca, sounding a little bothered. "I pulled it up from the ocean on my latest research trip."
Hold up a second. You mean to tell me that a pile of seaweed is what supposedly broke your bell? What? I am so confused by that. By the way, how odd that Theodore's the only one who can smell the seaweed. You mean to tell me that Benjamin nor the twins couldn't? I find that very hard to believe. Meanwhile, why did you find the need to bring this steaming pile of seaweed back with you? It's nothing special. It's just a plant. Unless this can somehow make you breathe underwater, I'm not interested. Alright, enough of that. So we heard Theodore make a joke, when not intentional, but it caused everyone to laugh hysterically. Because it felt so good to hear everyone laugh at his joke, this looked like a golden opportunity for cheeky little Theodore to start cracking some more jokes. But these aren't exactly funny.
That's a smelly belly!
He called out, hoping everyone could hear him. Then he looked to see if Philip or Fillmore found that funny. But this time he saw that they weren't laughing. Well, maybe they couldn't hear me, Theodore thought.
Rebecca is a wrecker!
He tried again, and this time he tried a little louder. But the fairy twins didn't even smile a little smile. They just kept going on their way. Even Benjamin Bridge looked away, like he hadn't heard Theodore. I wonder why they weren't laughing, thought Theodore, and he turned to go back to his talk.
Theodore, maybe it's because instead of being funny, you're now acting like a complete jerk, making fun of Rebecca? Of course, you don't realize this now, but you will. You will soon. Anyway, to Theodore, the jokes are still funny, and he tells them to hang back at the dock. Once again, Theodore receives the same reactions from the other tugs.
When I went to tell Rebecca that her bell was broken, I made a mistake and said her smell was broken, he said.
Hank laughed and laughed.
And then I said, Rebecca is a wrecker,
Theodore continued. But this time, Hank just looked puzzled. George and Emily only looked at each other and were silent for what seemed like a long time. Theodore wondered why they weren't laughing.
Well, how do you think that makes Rebecca feel?
Asked Emily finally.
Well, what do you mean?
Theodore asked.
She only has that seaweed on her deck because she has to.
It's part of her job, Emily said.
And on a hot day like today, she probably doesn't like how it gets smelly either.
Theodore got a sinking feeling in his hull. It was as though he had done something wrong. He began to wish he hadn't made any jokes at all.
Yeah, you really didn't think about that, did you, Theodore? Just because you thought the seaweed was smelly, you didn't think maybe Rebecca didn't like it either? Of course not. You were too busy being a little court jester. As if things couldn't get any worse for Theodore, the dispatcher then announces a change in the jobs. Remember at the beginning when George was supposed to move the garbage barge? Well...
A large ship has arrived early, he said. George, you'll bring her in. Theodore, you will take over George's job and tow the garbage barge. That is all. Now, Theodore usually loved to move barges, but this barge would be loaded with garbage. And on a day as warm as this, it was probably smelly garbage. He wasn't sure if he liked this change of jobs. Theodore noticed that George was smiling at him in a funny way. Was he laughing at him? Because he'd have to move the smelly garbage?
Yep. So now Theodore has to do this rather smelly job. You can definitely tell how pleased he is with this. And before I forget, get ready for another character introduction this season. And I will say, he's a real peach.
Let's get a move on, called the barge, whose name was Guysborough.
Coming,
replied Theodore. He took a deep breath and moved forward.
It must be awful to have all this smelly garbage on you all the time,
Theodore said as he buttoned onto the barge.
Look, it's my job to carry this garbage, and it's your job to tow me,
said Guysborough.
The sooner we get this unloaded, the sooner we'll both be away from this awful smell.
Great, said Theodore to himself. This isn't only a smelly garbage barge, it's a grumpy garbage barge.
So now we're introduced to Guysborough the Grumpy Garbage Barge. Didn't I say he was a peach? By the way, don't you love how Guysborough was just sitting in the middle of nowhere waiting for someone to pick him up? Why wasn't he at a dock or something? Well, regardless, Theodore was in a rotten mood between both the garbage and the barge. What didn't help him was that along the way, his friends were now beginning to make fun of him.
Hi, Hi, Smelly Billy,
said Hank, and he kept laughing and laughing.
It's not funny, Hank.
He called back to the dock. You see, Hank's laughing bothered Theodore.
Well, this smelly garbage isn't funny at all,
Theodore thought to himself. Guysbro didn't say anything. By now, Theodore was getting closer to the fairy twins, so as usual he called out,
Hi, Philip. Hi, Fillmore.
but instead of their normal little joke, they called back.
Have you checked to see that your smell or bell is working?
Philip added. The twins laughed and laughed. But Theodore didn't laugh. It seemed like everyone was making fun of him. He was so upset that he slowed to a stop. At that moment, he wished he could be all alone and cry. Then he looked over and could see Rebecca. Well, she wasn't laughing either. Now I know what she felt like when I made jokes about her seaweed being smelly, thought Theodore sadly.
Okay, 1, mood for wanting to be alone and crying. Join the club, Theodore. I do that every day. And 2, now Theodore is getting a taste of his own medicine. Obviously, it's never a good feeling when you become the butt end of someone else's joke. Hence why he now understands why everyone didn't laugh when he made the jokes about Rebecca. Because now basically everything backfired on him.
I'm waiting.
Oh, shut up! Who the hell asked you? Anyway, one way or another, he had to finish his job. So he eventually does, and then heads off to apologize to Rebecca.
Rebecca, he said slowly, I'm really sorry I teased you about the smelly seaweed you had on your deck. At first, Theodore thought that Rebecca wasn't going to say anything. I was just trying to make everyone laugh, Theodore continued. But now, I know it wasn't very funny for you. It wasn't your idea to have that stinky seaweed on your deck. No, it wasn't, said Rebecca quietly. Rebecca, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, said Theodore. Well, it did hurt a little, Theodore, said Rebecca. But then I decided you were only being silly. That's right, I was, said Theodore. Thank you for apologizing, Theodore, Rebecca said. I feel much better now. So do I, said Theodore.
Aw, that's nice. Everyone's all friends again. Thank goodness Theodore proved to Rebecca that he has well and truly learned his lesson. But I still don't get how, if it wasn't her idea in the first place, then why did Rebecca even bother bringing the seaweed back in the first place? That's a bit questionable on her part. Well, now that all is forgiven, it's time for Theodore to head home. And what better way to finish this off than having a joke with the two fairies again and pretending like nothing ever happened?
He drifted along quietly, enjoying the warm summer breeze. He could see Philip and Fillmore up ahead. Hi, Philip. Hi, Fillmore, he called.
But I'm Fillmore,
Said one,
I'm Philip.
called the other. And they all had a laugh together at their favorite little joke. Now Theodore was feeling much better. There's nothing like a good laugh, Theodore thought to himself. As long as everyone's laughing together. And off he went, chuckling all the way home.
And that concludes Theodore the Jokester. Well, aside from a few little gripes, I really enjoyed this one. I like the overall lesson that they're trying to express, basically showing us what happens when jokes aren't properly thought out, plus the consequences of becoming the butt end of someone else's joke. And that's exactly what happened to Theodore. Now, one could argue that Theodore is still pretty young and didn't realize what he was doing at the time. However, if this was an earlier Season 2 episode, then maybe I would have bought it. Where this episode kind of falls, you'd think he'd know a little better by now. But anyway, as mentioned before, we're now introduced to Guysbro, who we know is just a grumpy garbage barge. Thank goodness we don't see him for the rest of this season, but I'm sure he'll be a real pleasure from here on out. Music was once again kinda standard, and I did like the slight alteration to Theodore's theme towards the end. And visuals, we kinda just went back and forth, mainly between the Great Ocean and Rebecca's dock. I totally see this episode being relatable for some, and I believe it's a very important lesson that everyone should take note of. Up next is Emily the Vigorous.